paradox for me in this whole issue is that everybody talks about religion. I mean, when I talk of religion now, there's a course time and again they call me to give lectures in a university here on world religion. Whether I talk of Hinduism, you talk of Christianity, Buddhism, which is an atheistic religion, Jainism, Sikhism, all the light. There are three things that every religion highlights: an ultimate reality, ethics, and a life after death. So every religion has these values to push forward. Then what happens that the society is still lacking? It means we are not pushing enough and we are not consistent.
Why knowledge matters. Welcome, I'm Yannick, your host, and now joining me, Father Dr. Basile Sede. What a pleasure to have you on the show, Father Sede. How are you doing? Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much. The pleasure is mine.
Let's start. Who is, in one sentence, Father Basile Sede?
A Catholic priest incardinated in the Diocese of Buya, but presently serving in the Diocese of Charlotte, North Carolina, United States of America.
That's beautiful. I always dreamed to visit one day the Blue Mountains. You know, it's so beautiful. So beautiful. What made you pursue theology and all the other degrees also in education that you have? What was it specifically in your childhood that led you on a path to the exploration of the biggest question?
Honestly, as I try to explain in my recent publication, uh, I got into the priesthood thanks to God's call because originally I never thought I could be a priest. I was born and I just went to school as ordinary people will get there. By the time I got to the end of middle school, it just happened in one coincidence that I found myself in the junior seminary. And before I realized, I was in the major seminary, and then I was ordained 25 years ago. And in the priesthood, further studies is not like your choice. The bishops decide. Maybe they realized that I had a passion for education. Maybe they realized that I had worked in most institutions of learning. Then they thought that being my talent and my passion, I could excel in academics. So they asked me to do the further studies, and I was able to acquire the degrees and the certificates that I have.
That's beautiful. And specifically, what kept you so young? You look so young, still so dynamic. What is it? Tell us your secret.
My secret, honestly, I always tell people, most of my former students, they know Romans 8:28. Everything works for the good of those who love God. So whatever happens to me, I just keep smiling and going, knowing that God is going to, work out my path for me and blessing other people through me. That's what I've been doing so far as a priest.
So let's talk a little bit about contemporary challenges that the church in particular faces. What how does today differ from 25 years ago when it comes to churches and really people who attend churches specifically in the United States?
Permit me to start with Africa and end up in the United States because
Please.
these are two. I have the privilege that I've been to a few continents: Africa, Europe, America, Canada. I realize that the main challenge that the church in Africa faces is that now people are more open to ask questions. I always see what is happening in the church today in Africa as a microcosm of what is happening even in the government. People are more open now to challenge even church structures, institutions, even bishops are being pulled into social media, questioning their appointments and transfers and other decisions openly. And then coming over to the United States, the challenges are different. The United States is more conservative. The challenges I see in the United States now, at least where I belong, is that the clergy, just like a good number of the laity, want to push us to the conservative level. They want to go back to like the pure Catholic Vatican one way of worshiping. So there is that pull for conservatism, which again makes it personally. I endorse that in a way because we are living in a world too that is too liberal. So there is this clash between liberalism and conservatism. And then going to Europe, the paradox is that the society is more secular in a way that it reduces the Christian population. Statistics are falling. And the bottom line for me, as I see it, following my own private experiences, is secularism. But on the contrary, the Catholic population, at least in the United States, for my own experience where I am, is increasing. First of all, people are searching for happiness and meaning in life that is too materialistic. Secondly, I see a good number of migration, of the immigrants from, especially from the Spanish world, coming in, and even from Africa, who are fundamentally Christian, and that's how the population, Christian population, is swelling. Churches are getting full instead.
Also, touch a little bit on why the church should not necessarily just go with the flow, because obviously there are some progressive that say, well, we should follow the culture, right? But it's also dangerous, obviously, when you follow the culture, because people, they change with the different attitude and so on. But when you follow, let's say, a Christian God, you follow a God that is constant, right? So there are certain specific things that you'll never ever change. So touch a little bit more on these challenges today and how it influences your practice, when it comes engaging with your community in general in the United States.
Yeah, I want to look at it from again, from the dimension of being liberal or being conservative. Most often, when people ask me, "Are you a liberal or a conservative?" I say, "I'm a Christian." Because at the end of the day, it doesn't matter whether you are liberal or conservative, in as much as we follow the dictates of Christ, which the church preaches. And that's where I endorse Vatican II, which we adapt things according to our culture, but at the same time making the biblical culture, the the culture of Jesus Christ as the fundamental. That's why you see me, I always project my African culture, but at the end of the day, knowing that it must be informed and animated by Christian values. That's why with all the liberal things that are coming up, I ask myself, what does Jesus preach? In as much as Jesus Christ preaches reconciliation, in as much as he preaches mercy, forgiveness, he is also very firm about morality. And these are the moral values that, for me, the church should not compromise. I can sympathize with somebody whose nature is pulling him or her without out of the boundaries of Catholicism or Christianity, but at the same time, I'll make that person to understand that there is something wrong and you've got to adjust. That's why I say it's not a matter of being liberal or conservative, but it's a matter of being Christian, biblically founded on Christ Himself and principles of Christ.
Do you personally see a danger for society in general when you see a decrease in, for example, in Christians, let's say, for example, in Europe? That it's very obvious, right? It's very secular. I see it, for
Yes.
example, in Switzerland, extremely secular. Although evangelic evangelicals churches, actually, they attract more and more people, whereas the Catholicism, struggles, especially in Switzerland, where churches are more and more empty, and for good or bad reasons, you have mainly elderly people, which is great, but there is a lack of younger people who actually go and enjoy, the church.
I have often encouraged, especially the mainstream Christians, the elderly Christians, to keep going. It is really interesting that Jesus Christ came like alone and then got 12 people. And from those 12 people, the number kept increasing. Look at the number of Christians we have today. So imagine that these Christians we have today, even if the numbers have reduced, the few that we have, if they just start pushing the values out there. First of all, we got to realize that in Europe, even reproduction is an issue, family planning is an issue. So the population generally is reducing. Families are narrower than they used to be. But with the two or three children that I have, for example, I mean that or that somebody have, if we ensure that these three children are baptized, are brought into the faith, then the trend will continue. But the paradox and the difficulty is that with secularism, it is difficult because people just start following other avenues. But personally, my conviction is that Christianity is a vocation. It is Jesus himself calling people. That's why some theologians talk about a vocation to be born, a vocation to be a Christian, and a vocation to either be a priest or a married person. They look at everything in line of a vocation. We see Christianity thriving in Africa today. It was not the case a couple of years ago. Philosophers like Hegel, whom I admire, in spite of his own extremes too. I mean, I'm so sorry to quote philosophy. That's my own domain. They talk about world history moving, from place to place. Who knows? Maybe that's just a way of the absolute spirit in the words of Hegel manifesting itself. At first, it was Europe. Everything was all about Eurocentrism, everything. And then it shifted over to North America, Christianity triumphing. And then now we see the United States getting on, and then Africa even getting more, Europe now declining. So it's like things are good, and even Asia, Christianity is growing there. So maybe history continues to move around, but at the end of the day, it's the will of God, most fundamental. That notwithstanding, those of us who still stand on the Christian foundation, we've got to keep on pushing those values and let people see our lives as lives that are worth emulated, or lives that are based on values that can help them spiritually and physically too.
I think that's a very, very good and important point that you mentioned about vocation, right? And I think a lot of people today in North America, let's say, but also in Europe in general, have somehow a challenge to really find a vocation, because a vocation to me is something that you live by because it's your purpose, it's something that is given to you, and certain talents or whatever you acquired in order to help to make society better. And of course, Christianity is to some extent, as you mentioned, a vocation, right? So it helps to give you somehow purpose and meaning. Do you see, when you look at the mental health problem that we are facing today, do you see there is a correlation between non-believers and the fact that there is so much, oh, in general, we struggle so much with mental health issues, especially in the West? Do you think that there can be somehow a correlation to that?
Yes, there is, because once we start shifting away from Christian values, we open our hearts for some other values to get in. And I look at mental health as a distortion from the Christian path. Because Jesus Christ tells us that, John 10:10, I have come that they may have life and have it abundantly. And if we go by Christian ethics, the most fundamental, love your neighbor as yourself, the most fundamental golden rule, you know, doing good, the most fundamental, I think people will just be happy. But the issue now is that people want to start having happiness from other aspects. So once we start thinking that we can only get happiness when we have a lot of money, or we can only be happy if we take some kind of alcohol or medication, then we lose it all. And that's why my personal philosophy of life is that of personalism. John Paul II, Jacques Maritain. If each person recognizes the value in another person, nobody will have that tendency of being discouraged or disappointed in life. Because it is this fundamental disappointment that encourages mental health. And unfortunately, it is more into young people. That's the unfortunate issue.
Yeah, it's really difficult, and I think especially for the young people, with social media, there is just this prevalence of so many things that just collide with one another, and also the challenge that parents, themselves lose somehow the hold on their children, because they are more and more, they are oriented towards peer, right? It's like peer
Yeah,
orientation
yeah,
instead of having an anchor, like parents who help them guide, make good choices. And especially if you have something like the Bible, something, a fundament that you stand on, which is truly a bedrock in order to
yes,
live a meaningful life, then many things will not happen. So that is a huge challenge. I think when we look at just at the trajectory of our youth and what they have to go through, and just the fact that they spend so much time, in front of a screen, which just makes
yes.
all of it so much worse.
If I may just add something there, one difficulty of our time equally is that we adults, we don't know how to hand over. We have completely shifted the concept of tradition. Tradition, tradere, means to hand over to the previous generation. Now, philosophers talk of postmodernism. This is our present generation. They call it postmodern generation. A generation that they don't have any value for history. They want to do everything as if innovating, as if my own power. But on the contrary, I used to tell people, my father, for example, did not push me into the priesthood. But I admired every one of the values that he put to us, my mother and my father, my parents. You could you could do anything and go free. For example, when we were growing, but you can't not go to church on Sunday. You can't not say evening prayers. After that, sometimes you can sneak out and do what you want to do. But you knew that there was something that brings you to your roots, and that's spirituality. I used to challenge my friends like in the Western world. I said, all of us studied catechesis together. Our parents brought us to church, to mass or to church time and again. How many of them now, I mean, can bring their children to church? So we have forgotten our roots. Imagine Europe, how Europe was flourishing with Christianity, for example. If the churches are empty, it is because somebody did not hand over those values to the children. Children may not copy everything. Some of them will fall off in spite of all the effort you make. But trust me, if we put in 100% effort, at least we'll get 80% who will stick to it, if not 100%.
And it really goes back to basic habits, developing basic habits. For example, let's just make sure on Sunday you go to church, so you
Yeah,
dedicate at the very least one day to your spiritual, well-being and growth, right? And I think those kind of are structures, pillars that ultimately add up. And if they are lost, then you don't have really a fundament whereupon you stand anymore, which can be very troubling. So that's huge. So what is, in your case, what ought to be done in order to reverse that trend? How can the church or yourself as a priest help to, again, to bring parents more back to church, and also to bring especially also the children, and to instill this value again, that it helps them ultimately, and society at large?
I think first of all we need to pray because spirituality, our own relationship with God, we got to really improve it. And then secondly, I still think that we need to be a little consistent. I think consistency is what we really lack. Because sometimes you talk to people, they want to get their children baptized, they want to get them receive communion, they want to get them come to church. Once they come for the first 2 3 weeks, first 2 3 months, maybe 1 year, after that they just go loose. They are not consistent. And once we are not consistent, then things fall out. People just need to know what is good for them and decide how to do it. And sometimes I believe that we need to be a little hard, even to our children too. I keep telling parents that, you don't need your child to tell you whether I need to go to church or not. There are certain things that you just need to impose on them that this is what we are supposed to do, especially when they are at a certain level. And when I talk of imposition here, I don't mean forcing them. I mean them you convince them to see you doing it so that they know that they have no choice because you have no choice. If it's spontaneous on you, trust me, it will flow on the children and even the friends.
And that's so important because, simply children, they don't know yet what's best for them, right? So
Mm,
therefore adults, parents have to take these decisions for the child, because
exactly. Yes.
and that's very important, I think. And that's something that we have to really focus back again. But also it goes back obviously to the family, right? And there is also a certain, I would say, families are also weakened in this whole picture, right? It's more and more people, think that, well, of course it's also a political question. It's also expensive, right, having children, for example. And so especially in the West, in the conception, and that's also, it has to do with the wealth, right, that we have, right?
Yes.
And the more wealth you have, the more you take things for granted, and that's a huge, huge
Yes.
problem.
Yes.
And that's where really also
We have
education
become too
comes in.
liberal too with our kids, which I'm not saying that we should not give the children right, but I think as you and I are saying, there are times we just have to let them know that this is what happens. Because once we start allowing them to pick and choose, and then tomorrow when it goes the other way around, we are the ones to regret. I cannot tell you the number of young people they bring to me time and again to counsel for mental health, and I ask these people, what were you doing when this child was like 10 years? There was that missing link. You take the child for sports, you take the child for swimming class, take the child for vacation everywhere, give the child everything. No spiritual value, nothing. And then when the child becomes overwhelmed with all these things and excited with all these things in the world now, you find that there is something missing. Then you want to start coming to get spiritual assistance when the child is 16, 17 years. It's late.
Exactly. And then a lot of people, even older people, ultimately they might be in their 40s or 50s and ultimately realize, wow, you know what, I just was running, for the money and whatever, and
Yeah,
I didn't do anything. And then they hit bot rock, right? Rock bottom. I'm sorry.
yeah,
You
yeah.
know, so it's very important, because it's really what makes us human, right? And I
Yes,
think what really comes down, whether you're a Christian or not, but truly developing, from within, means that you are, and especially if you get older, the older you get, the more mature you get, hopefully,
yes.
with less you are content, right? And I think that is also, somehow it should be a goal, that you should be content with less, ultimately, which says
Yes.
something about your spiritual journey, right? Because you can never ever replace your spiritual growth with, let's say, material things.
Yeah. And I think the greatest paradox for me in this whole issue is that everybody talks about religion. I mean, when I talk of religion now, there's a course time and again they call me to give lectures in a university here on world religion. Whether I talk of Hinduism, you talk of Christianity, Buddhism, which is an atheistic religion, Jainism, Sikhism, all the light. There are three things that every religion highlights: an ultimate reality, ethics, and a life after death. So every religion has these values to push forward. But what happens that a society is still lacking? It means we are not pushing enough and we are not consistent.
Absolutely. And I think this is so important because culture is all based ultimately on religion. Okay, that
Yes.
was culture is a very new concept, actually.
Yes.
That at the very, very backbone of humanity has always been religion. And as you
Yes.
mentioned, you go to all the major religions, and if you just apply 10% of what they're actually preaching, oh my god, the world will be very,
The
very
world will be
different.
better. Yeah.
So it's really beautiful, and it's so important that you also do this job, because for you, especially as a Catholic priest, you really had to make a bold decision. Okay, that means you will never ever have a family, like a wife and kids. So how did this unfold, that you ultimately made this very choice in life? That was a big, big choice.
Yeah. You mean the choice of getting into the
Of
priesthood?
Exactly. So just walk us quickly through how you ultimately decided to go into priesthood.
Yes, honestly, as I told you, I got my Jubilee publication, The Strange Option: The Global Journey of an African Priest in Our Contemporary World. I'm trying to explain my story. When I was a kid, I was born in 1970. In my neighborhood, we had a church. European priests were like the priest there. So we looked at the priesthood as a strange option. Because first, priests unmarried, as you said, and they used to live around the graveyard in excluded area, so it was strange for somebody even to imagine how the priests live. But as we were growing, I started seeing African priests now coming up. And then my parents were devout Catholics. My elder brother was a person at some point wanted to be a priest. He became an altar server, and my parents gave him some favors. Then at some point, I thought I could also be an altar server. I could declare that I'll be a priest so that I could get some privileges at home like my elder brother. Then at some point, by the time we got into teenagers, he didn't think about the priesthood again, neither did I. And then when I got into middle school, I had to go to high school. That was like at the age of 18. And the only high school that was open to me at that time was the junior seminary. I did not want to continue schooling in my neighborhood again because life there was very exciting for me. So I needed a situation where I could be in like a dormitory school or out of town. I wanted to rent a house in one of the public schools, public high school. My mother refused. That she would not entertain me renting a house. So that's how I got into the junior seminary. And when I went there, the priests who were teaching us were fantastic. They were just happy people. And I told myself, what's the reason going out of this type of vocation? When I see people, so if I'm a priest, I'll be as happy and free as these other people, just attending to others, making others to be happy. Because whenever they came around, there was just joy and happiness. Cut a long story short, because of that inspiration, I dropped in my application to go to the seminary. Everybody was surprised because I had not declared that intention at any time. And I went in there with all the challenges after 8 years of seminary formation, as the standard is with us in Cameroon. I was ordained a priest in 1998, 16th of April.
And you're such a great example, because that's truly the living Christ in you, right? And that's how you inspire others to ultimately follow you, because just the fact that you have this, you emanate kind of this love, right? And that's why Jesus Christ also ultimately gained followers, because he loved them, so therefore they started following him. It was because ultimately they love and his presence, right? And that's truly inspiring. What makes you hopeful for the future?
I hope for the future because I believe that God is always in control. As I always tell people, it's not about me, but it's about a God who is love. So the future is always bright. And that's why I always like to make reference to St. Paul. Everything works for the good of those who love God. Everything works well. So if anybody comes to me with any kind of challenge, if I face any challenge, the fundamental question I ask myself, Basil, do you love God? If you come to me with your challenge, at the end of the day, I'll ask you, do you love God? Then I'll say, whatever the outcome, it will be for your good. Just keep loving. And loving God means do to no one what did no one done to you, the golden rule. So we just keep on like one family, keep on going. Happiness is our primary vocation, I believe.
Beautiful. What makes you feel alive?
I feel alive because I touch the lives of others. Sometimes, honestly, I don't even think about my own self. Because by the time I reflect, I think about what A has presented to me as a challenge to pray for, what B intends to see me and talk about, where I'm supposed to go tomorrow for this or that spiritual value. So I feel alive because I know that I help other people to be alive. And I always feel very happy when, after communicating with somebody, the person tells me a simple thank you. Thank you. So I know at least the person has benefited something from my own spiritual encounter, as limited as I can be too.
Dr. Basile Sede, thank you so much for truly being a gift to the world and especially to me and giving me this time. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Yannick.
Dr. and Father Basile Sede. That's why knowledge matters. Make your life a masterpiece. Visit now programs.d-ykm.com.